And we are live. Welcome to episode 6 of the Buffet Show here in Japantown, San Francisco. Here with Genny Lim. Thank you, Genny Lim, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Jerry.
This is our 6th episode. And just to give a background on the Buffet Show, I just do these interviews with folks that inspire me, and hopefully it inspires others. And we kind of talk about more the process of, folks doing their work, whether it be for the community, whether it be for arts, community organizing, educators. And so the buffet, we were just talking before we started, the Buffet Show, inspired by Al Robles. Shout out to Al Robles, poet, who inspired me. And it was about the buffet, the Issei buffet, the first generations that came through to the U.S. that congregated together at these places of surrounded by food and conversation. And so hopefully the Buffet Show inspires others and sparks conversation with others. So thank you, Genny, for being here. I want to just go ahead and introduce Genny, little bit of a background on her. She is the current San Francisco Jazz Poet Laureate. She has performed in poetry and music collaborations with such great artists, late great artists, jazz legends such as Max Roach and Herbie Lewis, and has been featured at the World Poetry Festivals in Venezuela, Bosnia, and Italy. Her award-winning play, Paper Angels, focused on the Chinese immigrants detained on Angel Island here in the San Francisco Bay during the Chinese exclusion era. And this aired on PBS back in 1985, and it came back again in 2010, garnering a San Francisco Fringe Festival Award, as well as in 2016 at the Seattle Fringe Festival. Genny's performance piece, Don't Shoot, a Requiem in Black, is dedicated to Black Lives Matter, and it premiered last year at the Safe House and will be presented at the San Francisco Jazz Poetry Festival at the SF Jazz Center this year. Genny is also the author of 4 poetry collections, Winter Place, Child of War, Gods and Rebels.
You got it.
All right. And co-author of the award-winning seminal book, Island Poetry and History of Chinese Immigrants on Angel Island, which will be published in Chinese this year.
Yes.
And so maybe we can talk about it a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, thank you, Genny Lim, for being on the Buffet Show. I want to go back. Let's go back, Genny. When did you start writing? When did that urge or feeling of trying to put stuff down, whether it be on paper or whatever, when did that come to you?
I think it came very early on. My recollection of the first time I had anything published was when I think I was about 7 or 8 years old. There used to be a writing contest that had restricted to no more than 1 or 2 paragraphs. And it was a San Francisco Examiner writing contest. And any age, you could send your work in, and they would pick a winner. I don't know if it was weekly or bi-weekly, but anyway, so I wrote this story. I sent it off to the San Francisco Examiner. I didn't tell anybody I'd done this. And lo and behold, I heard back, like shortly, that I had won. And I kept the story for many years, and then I think one day I decided to down, I just get rid of everything. And I think, I wish I had saved that. But I won $2 for that. It was published in the San Francisco Examiner. And the crazy thing was that, I grew up in San Francisco, Chinatown, North Beach, Chinatown, and never lived in the country. And this story was called Winona.
Okay.
Wins the 4-H prize with her, like her runt calf that everybody had laughed at. This runt calf, they said, oh, that calf would never make it in the 4-H contest. And then she loves it, nurtures it, feeds it, and grooms it. And lo and behold, this calf wins. I have no idea where this came from. But I think, I really always fantasized of, what country life would be like and living in the wilderness and nature. I love nature. And so I fantasized this story. And I believe that's the beginning of my journey as a writer.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy, though.
I mean,
of all things to write about.
You say you fantasized about it, but was there something as you were growing up to be able to create something, I'll just try this out. But even before that, were you somebody that wanted to express themselves in some way, or
the creative urge? I always had the creative urge ever since, I can remember. And I would fantasize, again, watching the Saturday, they would show all these musicals. MGM had all these Fred Astaire musicals, and that, Jane Powell and, Ethel Merman, whoever. And I would sit glued to the television, and after I would imitate them and imitate Shirley Temple and sing all the songs and everything. And so I had fantasized being some kind of a performing artist ever since I was young. But to be a writer, that never even entered my mind in my youth. That wasn't an option in my family. So to me, it was always an imaginary life, like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I had The Secret Life of Genny Lim, right, where I fantasized myself being in show business, a soft shoe dancer, a singer, or a movie star. And I kind of kept that to myself. So maybe the writing was a way to sublimate all of that in a way that was accessible to me.
I mean, do you, and you kind of talk about the poem that you submitted to the Examiner, and then you got your $2. Now, when you started to get that recognition, I mean, that was an Examiner, fairly large paper, and so now you get the $2. What happened after that in terms of the process of creating works and kind of developing that skill?
I think I got a lot of affirmation and reinforcement from English teachers in grade school and throughout my public education years. I always did really well in English, especially when it came to essay writing or writing stories. And I was just horrible in math. So I always focused on the writing and would get a lot of encouragement for that. And even back in middle school, I remember writing poems, and I think they were probably pretty affected, like trying to sound like a poet, but nevertheless, trying to use big words and things like that, and concepts that were kind of over my head, but that's what was my idea of what poetry was. So I was writing poetry and writing very early on, even then, and I would have a couple of girlfriends, and we would share our stuff that we had mutual interests, which was music and writing. So we would share our we were all very affected. We would read our poems to each other and speak in French. We were taking French and trying to sound real cultured, right?
Okay, I took French as well in college. All right,
Yeah.
In high
And
school.
tie up the phone, and my father would be yelling, "Get off the phone!" Pre-smartphone days, pre-pager days, right? Yeah. So I'm showing my age, physically and story-wise.
Now, would you be, in your room? Would you be, out and about walking around in San Francisco? Where would that kind of space where you're able to kind of just, write?
Yeah, I was kind of a closet writer because I came from a large family. There's 7 kids in our family. Of course, the older ones were much older than I, because we had a big span, and so the 2 oldest were already married. But nevertheless, that left, the rest of 6 of us in the household. So never a moment of privacy. So I would write in my diary and something, and keep my thoughts in that. Then one day, I have a brother who is terrible. It's a real jokester, and he found my diary. And then he, the way he did it was he would, share information from my diary and not telling me where he got it, like he was a mind reader or something. And he would say a few things at one moment and a few things, another day. So I sort of figured it out that he must have been reading my diary. And so I destroyed the whole thing. And then that stopped my journal writing altogether. And I think the reason why, maybe subconsciously or maybe somewhat consciously, I was more attracted to poetry was because it was more subtle. It was like a coded language that you really have to be into poetry, and you have to be doing some really deep listening and thinking to get into the interior of a poem. So I knew my brother was not that inclined toward literature. So he would never even care if I wrote poems. But if I had written anything journalistic or memoir-wise, I would be, interrogated or teased. So I think that's why I've always kind of been a little bit apprehensive about writing memoir, writing a novel, autobiographical, even autobiographical fiction. I tried to do it, but then something in me kept pulling me away from that. Something about self-disclosure.
How many did you destroy?
Well, I have one that, I haven't really tended to for many years. Yeah. And then I keep trying to go back to it, and it ends up, I end up writing poems instead. So it might have been, that might have been the initial impetus toward sticking with poetry. And it gave me, again, I'm a very private person that way, a more private space with which to express myself. Instead of being literal, when you're literal. And even then, in an interview I gave once, and I shared about my father being a paper son, and then my older sister disputed that. She goes, "Why? I don't know why you said that. He was born in Oakland." and because that was the official history, was that he was born in Oakland. But, I've done a certain amount of research into Angel Island history, right through Island, and I happen to know that he was born in China. Yeah, so, which really shows you how much paranoia still exists. Maybe less so now today, because of the younger generations are very, they're Americanized, and they're not going to get sent back. Well, at least we hope not back to China. But for many, many years, there was never any amnesty given to Chinese Americans, after the Exclusion Act was, repealed in 1943. There was no official amnesty for all the paper sons. And now with Trump, you never know what can happen. So that was what my father's thinking was. And I'm sure my sister had, she was my older sister, had that same, feeling that she fervently believed that he was American. Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of just inspiration for yourself as you were starting to develop, who inspired you to kind of push yourself and motivate you to create pieces, to create books, as you were growing up?
I have to say a lot of the Black writers,
Okay.
because they were writing about their authentic experiences as African Americans. And I could relate to that as an Asian American. I said, wow, they're really, spilling the beans about what it's like to be an African American, and all of the, the economic struggles that they have. I could see it in my own family. We were 7 of us. My father never, ever, opted to take any welfare. He had all this pride. Says, that would be like a beggar begging. So he worked at, working class jobs as a janitor. And when then his father came here and then went back to China several times and was unable to come back to the U.S. one time. He didn't, he wasn't landed. So my father was stuck here on his own as an adolescent. So he was, doing whatever he could, migrant farm working, working as a cook in a ship, all kinds of things like that. So, and reading, if you read like Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, those writers, say, wow, this is the real America that you don't often read about, because the other stories portray white America, which, was really so different from my own years, formative years as Asian American, Chinese American.
In terms of those writers kind of shaping your work, when you approach a piece, are you doing one piece at a time? Are you doing multiple things? Pieces of paper all over the place? What exactly is your approach in terms of trying to put together a piece or pieces?
That's a good question, and it goes to the claim that somebody said that the actual fact of the matter is that a writer is always writing the same book, writing the same poem. It's just different facets of that same piece. I think every personal narrative is like many faceted story, but there's a through line. And I think so in writing one poem, I bring in a lot of different aspects of, class, whether about being a woman, about feelings of racism, all of that, the political contradictions that we live in today in society. That's all there. You can, if you study the poem and listen to what's happening, you get a sense of a whole experience. And that's what it means to me to say you are writing about the Japanese American experience, the Chinese American experience. It's all of that, but told through a single lens, because you can't say everything, you can't cover everything. Mm-hmm. So you try to find that one piece of, that one thread that you can pull that will reveal other things. Mm-hmm. And it's all part of one story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you find it challenging? Was it difficult for you? I mean, starting out now, it hasn't become easier for you, as you matured and kind of developed those skills. Describe any of those challenges that you've had as you're developing
That's a good question too, Jerry. I think as I've developed as a writer, I'm trying to like uncover the layers. In fact, as I was developing, it was a matter of learning different techniques, trying, sampling, imitating other writers, trying to find my voice. And so you keep layering and layering, and sometimes you know, like over gilding the lily, you know, it becomes, so where's the poem? There's all this stuff going on, but what is actually being said here? So as I get older now, it's a matter of getting out of my way and trying to, you know, get the ego out of the poem and trying to distill the real poem. And oftentimes that poem seems kind of like unrelated to me. I'm detached from the poem because I'm trying to let the poem speak for itself rather than being so overtly, consciously you know, it's me saying the poem, right? So trying to, you know, unlearn things in a way, trying to unlearn the bad habits that I picked up over the years, you know, because.
Oh, I mean, are they really bad though? I mean.
Bad in the sense that they're not really me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're not like authentic. I mean, like I get so like impressed with, oh man, that's great, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why can't I, you know, be more funny, or why can't I, you know, do that in my poem? And I'll try different things, you know, as I was going along. I said, you know, wow, you know, like this is not really me. Yeah, and it's, you know, coming to recognize when it's not really coming from deep within, because I think our minds, our intellect gets in the way of our art oftentimes. And if you let the intellect, you know, release the intellect and get rid of it, not by stamping on it, but just kind of be more open to letting the story, the narrative tell itself, the poem find itself. So sometimes you have to meditate more on it to get your mind to be more pure and open. It has to be more connected. The heart and the mind has to be really connected.
Do you feel that you've had to hold back? Do you feel as if, you know, you kind of alluded to like this, you know, being really self-critical. Right? I'm that way as well. You know, I want to put stuff together, but
that's good in some respects, right? Because you know when you're being bad.
Right. Yeah.
And do you feel yourself self-regulating? Do you have this self-censorship? I know part of it is trying to get down deep and get it out, right? Do you, as a poet, as a writer, do you feel that you hold back quite a bit, or do you feel as if, this is what I want to say, I'm getting it together, I'm focused on it, it's good, I'm letting it out, but, do you feel as if, that being that self-critical self, right? Do you feel as if you're not to that point? Is it, in terms of walls, are you breaking these walls down? Are you continuing to break these walls down? Or
I hope so, but in a sense, as you were saying, the self-criticism can be debilitating. It can inhibit your self-expression. And I think I'm pretty direct and about where I'm coming from. And most people that hear my poem say, "Oh yeah, your stuff is out there. You don't hold bars. You just say what you want to say. In terms of political types of attacks or poems." But in one sense, I'm being more open about my beliefs and views in my poetry, because I'm really passionate about certain human rights, for instance, or the environment. So I'm not going to downplay that or water that down. But what I need to do, instead of just coming out and blasting about, oh man, fracking is fucked, or whatever it is, you got to find, I'm trying to find a way to be equally passionate and equally tempered, in a sense that, you know, you're not just like yelling, you know, or protesting. You are trying to find a way to say this in a way that will make somebody think twice, who doesn't believe you, who doesn't agree with you. And they cannot just go like that, because that's what happens all the time. She's like pro-Palestinian. I'm not, she's anti-Semitic or something. And I'm not going to go that road where they can, you know, charge me with being that. I'm going to find a way to say something on a level that I hope speaks to their moral conscience and their heart, rather than to their, you know, intellect.
Has the process, or even being, you know, kind of glued into, you know, writing and poetry and just working on putting things together, has that, you know, has that been challenging in terms of, you know, relationships with others, you know, because, you know, I've talked to folks about, you know, the artists, right? They get into being the artist, and they're kind of zoned in, and while they're focusing in, all this stuff is happening around them. You know, do you find yourself having that challenge? Has it been difficult? You know?
Well, yeah, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to deal with my taxes, for instance. Or, you know, things like that. I kind of let sometimes fall by the wayside. Go, oh, did I not pay that? I thought I paid it. Oh, I paid it last year. You know, and those things seem like minutia to me. The things I don't like to do, you know, but you got to deal with. And I think what keeps me really grounded, thankfully, is my grandkids, you know, because I take them 2 days of the week. And when I'm there, if I don't have my full attention on them, things happen, you know, with kids, right? Things happen. They can run across the street, or make a mess of the house, you know. So, and that happens whenever they're bored or restless, if they're not engaged. So I got to get them engaged. And so that's kind of a good lesson, a good metaphor as a writer, as a poet. You gotta, if you're not engaged in your poem, the audience is not going to be engaged in your poem. And so there's a price that comes with it. For one thing, you know, I'm not currently with anybody. I'm a partner, and I chose to focus on my writing, and trying to stay grounded as a person. And if you know, like if a relationship is not happening on the level that, you know, I think is, you know, going to work out, you know, in terms of what I want to do in my life, and if there's some kind of a pushback, then I won't hesitate to say I don't think this is going to work, because I feel like my creative, you know, energy is sapped or something. So people have to make their choices. The ideal is if you could find someone, you know, that complements that, you know, that you can work really independently and separately, but at the same time, you're always aware and supportive of each other. That's ideal, but that doesn't always happen. You know, like one partner will feel like, well, you know, I don't feel like you're, you know, involved in this relationship to the level I would like you to be. You know? So there's, you know, push and pull. And I think if you have an intelligent, mature relationship, you would be mutually supportive of each other. Of course, the kids, that always adds another demand, right? Well, you know, I've been with the kids all week, and you've been traveling and doing your buffet or whatever, right? So you have to negotiate those things, yeah.
Then, so I want to kind of get into, you know, you starting to write, you know, you're writing on paper, you're writing, getting up in front of an audience. So when did that, was it a natural transition? what was that like in terms of stepping up in front of a mic or, you know, on a stage or wherever and sharing on, you know, on a stage in front of an audience? What was that experience like?
My formative experiences in shaping my performance persona is kind of embarrassing because at some point in our family, my older sibling, my sister, got converted into Mormonism because there was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that, you know, decided to set up a branch in the Cafe Legion of Honor on Powell Street, and then so the missionaries would canvass all the families in the neighborhood, and they came to ours, and then so my sister started going to their church meetings on Sunday, and then of course she brought me, little sister, and then over time we got baptized as Mormons. And one of the things that they do is they have these what they call 2.5-minute talks, where people get up and they basically, you know, bare B-A-R-E, bare their testimonies. And sometimes people would get up and it's kind of like the 12-step program, and they'll say, oh, I found, you know, the church and it saved me from a life of ruin and whatnot. And then even the children, you know, like we were, you know, asked to, well, what are you thankful for? You know, and so a couple of times I would get up and I would be terrified, and then we'd have this little written speech. So this is, I am so grateful for my family or whatever like that, and do a short little thing. And I think that really kind of prepared me, because you have to stand before the congregation of adults and children and whatnot for what they say 2.5 minutes, give or take. Some people went on forever. And it
wasn't timed then, even though it was 2.5 minutes. Yeah. It wasn't quite timed.
Yeah, I think they say that so you won't be intimidated.
Okay.
You know, you don't have to. It's just 2.5 minutes. You know, so you get up there and do that number, and then that started to, you know, I started to lose my stage fright doing those 2.5-minute talks. So I have the Mormons to thank for that.
So that was the foundation.
Yeah, well, that's one of the ones I think that come to my mind. I'm sure there were others.
So when you started to, you know, open mics, where did you go to start to, you know, read your poetry, your works?
Kearny Street Workshop.
Okay.
Yeah, because George Leong was the founder of the Writers Workshop, one of the, maybe someone else too. And that was where we'd hang out, Al Robles, George Leong, the Filipino poets, Luciquia, you know, Presco Tabios, and Nancy Wong, Nelson Wong, and all those people. We'd get together on Friday night, and someone would bring a jug of wine, and then people would read poems, and we'd critique each other's poems. You know, I had already been writing on my own when I was living in New York for 5.5 years, and I had a bunch of poems. So when I came to relocated back to San Francisco, I, you know, found out about the Kearny Street Workshop and started bringing in my poems. And so over time, we started to do public readings. We did readings like at San Quentin, and then we did readings associated with the I Hotel, with the Angel Island exhibit that was done there before the, you know, the demolition. And so that felt good to be, especially reading with fellow Asian American poets.
What was the how was the critique? How was that environment?
It was generally very supportive. Okay. But then there was this Nelson Wong, he would come. He was very outspoken, and he would say to George Leong, I remember this, that's Black poetry. that's Black poetry. That's not Asian American. And there would be this, and I think overall it was very healthy, because we were being influenced, as I said before, by the civil rights movement, and a lot of the civil rights leaders and the artists that came out of the Black arts movement. We were all very much influenced by that because we could relate to that. So of course, a lot of those cadences and rhythms of the blues, music of the blues and of jazz, and entered our work. And we were American. We spoke English. We didn't speak, Chinese and Japanese. I had immigrant parents at home, but some of that language also creeped into my poetry. But so it was, we were very assimilated to everything that was in our environment. We were American educated, so we were exposed to American poetry, American poets, and, the Black poetry. And, and then, of course, for me, Angel Island poetry was very, very impactful on shaping my sensibility in terms of both themes and the language.
What was the experience of working with Max Roach?
Oh, that was amazing. Even though he's, like this genius, the one thing that everyone learned from him, like when oftentimes when poets get together with musicians, the music is a lot louder, right? Horns and drums, they overwhelm. Oftentimes, if it's not mic'd properly, or the musicians get into their zone, and they would overwhelm the poet. And so he just stopped everything one time. He goes, "Stop! Can you hear? Can you hear?" He was asking the musicians. He goes, "I can't hear." So this is a guy who could play rhythms around anybody, right? But he had ear. He said, if you can't hear, the poet, what's the point? So he was, very, very good about supporting, the singer, the poet, really good at listening, not just to, volume, the content. He really wanted to understand. He really listened very hard to what the poem was about. And I believe that was why most artists are very curious people. They want to learn about other cultures. And he was very curious about the Asian American experience. That's why he and John Jang, that's how it started. They got together, and he was very fond of John, and vice versa. And then Anthony Brown became, they all were mentored by I'm thinking about Art Blakey. He was another one. He was another influential person. Yeah, Max. Yeah, and he was, he genuinely was interested in you and interested in hearing you.
In terms of your progression, you not only speak, but you also sing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that was that an easy kind of transition to incorporate that into your work, or is that something that one day you just was like, oh, I'm just going to try this out and let's see how this works?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because for many years, a long time, I didn't see any way to bridge the singing and the poetry, and I always kept it separate. If I'm going to sing, I'm going to sing. If I'm going to do poetry, I'm going to recite poetry. And then I started to think more about the origin of poetry, and how when I grew up listening to Chinese opera, that's like a story told through singing and speaking. And I said, I've kind of lost that as an assimilated American poet. I've lost touch with the music. The origin of poetry is song, and then the song became memorized through chants, right? Through the repetition, incantation, and that's why you have the choruses, and you had the rhythm and the meter, so that you can remember the stories that you were telling. So I wanted to get back to that, and I wanted to find a way to do that felt natural, organic, and authentic, and not, in kind of a hokey way, and so the people to do that with naturally was Francis Wong and John Jang, because they were on a similar path to explore Asian music in a jazz idiom. And I'm trying to explore, the Asian approach within the jazz idiom.
Now, how was that connection when it first happened? How did that come about then? Meeting up with John and John Jang, pianist John Jang, and Francis Wong. And then they started developing the Asian improv.
Yeah.
But how did that meeting come together?
Well, we were before it became more of a conscious thing. It was a movement thing, and we would somebody or John or Francis would ask me if I would come and do this political rally or benefit or event, and oftentimes here at JCCNC, it was against African apartheid, and we would, they through CPA and organizations like that would do an event, and they would always want to bring in some music. So I'd get asked to be part of that. So we did a lot of hotel kind of things, and then over time, as they became more serious practitioners and students of creative Asian American music, then we started to collaborate on specific thematic pieces. And John was starting to write a lot of suites, and then Francis was doing a lot of stuff always. And then we, I would say, I have this poem here, and it was written so that it could be sung in certain parts, and then I would just start vocalizing, and they would, support me, find a way to support me. And because they were, hearing a lot of the Asian, John was listening to the sorrow songs, so, and African music and the, Asian Oriental music are all based on the pentatonic. So that's the blues, right? And that's Japanese and Chinese music. And I believe that they all sprang from the same source. And in fact, I was reading an interview with Quincy Jones, recently, is saying that he dated Ivanka, and she had great legs.
He said a lot of stuff.
Yeah. He said that one of the less outrageous things in that interview about law, but that was more memorable to me than all that other gossip, was that he and somebody was looking at this old map, 100, whatever it was, a 70-year-old, 60-year-old map of Africa. And in it, they showed how the planet used to be, maybe a million years ago, 50, however, that China was connected to Africa. You stood around where Durban was, the tip of Africa was once connected to China. And so he believed that because there's a lot of Asian influences in African music, and a lot of African instrumentation and influences in Chinese music. So then I said, oh, great, this is not something that's, like a phony, that we're not trying to, reinvent the wheel, that we're adding, we're just kind of continuing on this trajectory, and this is in a natural evolution of that, that relationship between China and Japan, all of Asia and Africa. and that we're part of this tradition, and we're not, just forcing, something to happen that wasn't already naturally there. In a sense that we're rediscovering the tradition and the past through our music and through poetry.
What do you find joy in?
The moment of creation, when I'm on stage and I'm giving voice to, every time I recite the poem, it's like giving birth to that poem, and you try to keep that moment of freshness there, of birth. And then especially, that's why I like to work with musicians so much in that collaboration. You never know what's going to happen until you both come together. And in that moment of synchronization, something miraculous can happen. Of course, it could go the other way too. Mm-hmm. But if you have people that are in sync with you and have the same vision and approach, and of being in that moment of pure just engagement and involvement, then it's whatever it is, it's going to be fine, because it's going to be honest, and it's going to really happen at that moment, and it can't happen at any other moment but that moment. So that gives me the greatest joy, because it's like, for me, it's like, must have been kind of like when they first opened King Tut's tomb, like, whoa, right. Who knew that this was all there,
What continues to motivate you to continue to write and just create? Is there a certain thing? Is there certain people? What motivates you to create?
Human connection, because when I'm writing the poem and I finish, I feel a moment of a sigh, a relief. But I think this is as close to being done for now as I can get it. That's like the first phase, like the pregnancy, 9 months, you carry this along. And then when you give birth, like I said, in front of the audience, then, you share that moment with the audience, and you're seeing that, oh, they're seeing this, they're sharing this baby. They know this is this is a baby, and it's a gift to everyone. And you see that connection, and people really thinking, and oftentimes they'll come up to you after and start talking, oftentimes in very personal terms, total strangers. And that's the joy, is that human connection. Suddenly all the masks, and the whatever it was, that separated you before, they heard your poetry, and suddenly there's this closeness. And I'm not like a real extrovert, I'm kind of more on the shy side in general, and so with the poetry helps me to break down the barriers of kind of feeling shy or standoffish.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. We got 3 more questions. This is the final 3.
Okay.
Final 3. If you were to do any other job, what would it be?
President. Any
I
other?
don't know about that job. But
Yeah. I'm just saying that anybody you can find off the street can do a better job than what we have now.
yeah.
Blindfolded too. But let's see, I think it would be to have I would love to have like a jazz cafe,
Yeah.
and invite artists to come and play, and people to come and eat food and drink. That would be cool, if I didn't have to worry about, the money end of things.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
I actually like that idea. You do have one of your pieces that will be translated into Chinese this year, which is The Island, the poetry and history of Chinese immigrants on Angel Island. That's happening this year. How's that process been in terms of trying to get that out?
Oh, well, I think they must have come to us, and actually Judy with Young, who co-authored Island with me, as well as Himmark Lai. She's been really key in, being the liaison on that one.
Right. Shout out to Judy Young.
Yeah.
She was my professor as well at UC Santa Cruz.
She found a top-notch translator, Eileen Young, I think, to translate the whole. That's a big job.
Yeah.
She translated that into Chinese for us, and then, so it's ready to go to press. Then I also have another collection that was translated into Italian, just a couple, when I came back from, Italy several months back. That was done in Italian.
Wow.
Yeah. So that.
And when is that coming out this year as well?
That came out already.
Oh, okay.
They actually had it published, and they had to beat the bushes to get it published before I got to Italy, so that they could, go with me. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's I like that collection too, because it's in Italian.
Yeah. And we'll if you give me that, we'll go ahead and post that as well.
Oh,
in terms of
okay.
the link or where people could get it. And then this is the buffet show. We can go out without talking about food. So this is going to be the food and music question.
Okay.
So ideal meal, last meal, or meal that blows your mind. What would you pair it with in terms of music?
Oh, I'd start with what the food would be.
Food would be and music that will accompany that meal.
It would have to be the traditional Chinese New Year's banquet. And it being Chinese New Year now, I'm getting ready after this to go to Chinatown to buy all the ingredients to make the Lohan Jai, the Buddha, the Buddha noodles.
Okay.
Yeah, and all of that. So I love that dish, and you have to have all these ingredients to make it. It's a vegetarian dish, so it's the monk's food. So I would have with everything else that goes with a Chinese New Year's banquet, and I would have some rousing jazz. Yeah.
Any particular artist group that you want playing?
Oh, well, I'm when I do the April 8th version of the Black Requiem in Black with Marshall Trammell and Francis Wong, I'm dedicating that to Charles Mingus. He did the Fables of Faubus, that in that one kind of like decrying all of the pushback from the white supremacists, nationalists that was happening in Alabama, right? And so this was a tune, and he actually sings, why are you so ridiculous? Dun, 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 dun. I would have Mingus and Dolphy, and Charlie Parker and Coltrane. And some John Jang and Francis Wong and Anthony Brown's Asian American Orchestra.
Nice, you got a whole playlist going.
Yeah, I got a whole long.
Well, you got a whole bunch of
and
stuff.
then I'm going to intersperse it with Chinese opera, Cantonese opera, and gagaku. Mix it all up. People go, what?
That is awesome.
What is this?
That's all right. That's great. Well, thank you, Genny Lim. We are.
Oh, and some Michael Jackson and Prince.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
Bruno Mars.
Which album of Michael's?
Oh God, let's
Are you
see.
going off the ball? Or are you
Yeah, Thriller. I like that.
Oh, okay. But thank you, Genny Lim, for being on the buffet show.
Yeah,
Appreciate
my
it.
delight.
Thank you.
Now I feel hungry.
That's what we try to do.
Yeah.
So we try to whet the appetite. So thank you. Episode 6 is wrapped. Episode 7 coming soon. Hope you check out the Twitter, check out the Instagram. We'll send that information out soon.
This guy's
So,
happening.
Try it. Thank you, Jenny. Are we out?
Okay. Bye.